Now we want to bring in here in the studio, Anne Breaud is the woman who took that now infamous photograph of the mayor and Jeffrey Vappy at Tableau Restaurant, and her attorney's joining us in the studio now. Can you just give me your thoughts when you first saw this indictment coming down, and the fact that your client is pretty much mentioned in this indictment as well as, you know, being sort of a victim of this scheme? Right,
sure, Katie. I think this indictment, I haven't spoken in depth with Anne yet, but she's, I think, monitoring this. She's actually on vacation this week and able to kind of take all this in without the being barraged with a whole lot of questions. I think this was a confirmation to what we had suspected all along, and it kind of gave a little bit, a few more breadcrumbs to where we were really trying to go with this. As you probably know, we filed the federal lawsuit in July of 2024. The city and the mayor have done everything they can to stall that process. They actually tried to initially have it done in 2026, and fortunately, Judge Brown was not going to allow that to happen. She said, "Look, I like to have my docket run in 10-month cycles. You're going to go in 2025." So we had an October 20th court date this year, which inevitably will be continued, I'm sure. But during that year, we really haven't had the opportunity to do any kind of discovery. They've been, requests to stay, amendments to motions to dismiss, amendments to our petition, and so all that has kind of held up the discovery process, which has been kind of a challenge for us. But I think what we, up until today, when we learned that although we weren't doing discovery, obviously the FBI had been doing discovery.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big questions that we were talking about earlier. Investigative reporter Mike Pearlstein here with me as well. But we were talking earlier about the fact that we're still unclear, and you all are still unclear, on who searched Anne in federal law enforcement databases to come up with the information that was then later included in that restraining order application.
Right. And so there was some, I think the city, whether intentionally or not, when we initially filed the lawsuit, we weren't sure exactly how the information came about. We then learned in January, through the initial disclosure process, we got the PIB reports on the officers that were involved in that, and as Michael said earlier, those were dismissed, and I was the one who said, look, we need to dismiss these, because on May 9th, once the report was filed, I think those officers did exactly what they did. I think what we went back and reviewed, though, was the mayor had the information before Officer Guzman walked into her office to take at 2 o'clock on May 9th to get that information. So there's still another actor out there that we don't know who it is, whether that's Jeffrey Vappy himself, whether it's a colleague or friend of Jeffrey Vappy that he had to do it. That's one of the things. So we're hoping that that's something that the FBI will look into, or the attorney's office, and say exactly where is that information coming from, because we know someone had accessed it prior to that. Because in her interview with Officer Guzman, when she's giving that police report to bolster her stalking claim, she is feeding Guzman with that information. So that's what we suspect. We'll find, and hopefully, whether this comes about. Now, I'm sure now that there is a formal indictment out, the city and Mayor-Cantrell's, will file to stay the civil action pending the criminal action, and I think that's probably in all likelihood it will be granted, and eventually Anne Breaud will have her day in court. But I think. Right now, I got the federal government doing discovery for me, so I'm
absolutely.
very happy about that.
And Mr. Schmidt, I was going to ask you about that. This, federal civil rights lawsuit has been stalled. Now it appears it's going to be stalled even longer while this criminal indictment takes precedent. But language in the indictment under the conspiracy count, very broad, does include the statement that the mayor signed an affidavit under oath that contained multiple material false representations. That clearly helps your defamation angle of your lawsuit.
Well, absolutely, and I think we saw that even in a state court case where the petition for protection was filed. I mean, alleging that Anne Breaud took 800 hours of video of the mayor is just ludicrous. And she did following her and stalking her and showing up in places where she didn't, she wasn't supposed to be, or going into uninvited places. All those were things that there's no, there was no scintilla of of any evidence to suggest that those were legitimate claims. And I think the trial court saw through that, and for that reason summarily dismissed the petition for protection and granted and the legal fees under the special motion to strike, our Louisiana's anti-SLAPP motion.
And yet, the question that we were hoping maybe to get some light and answers to is who did the actual NCIC check. Now, we know that a ordinary citizen, including the mayor, cannot herself have the identification credentials to get into NCIC.
Right.
But the indictment only states, and I'll quote, Cantrell abused her position to obtain non-public information and then file a police report about a New Orleans resident, that would be Anne Breaud, your client, who took and disseminated photographs of Cantrell and Vappy together in public. So we still don't have an answer as to who, with the proper law enforcement credentials, went into NCIC and gave Cantrell that information.
Well, Mike, we don't have that information, but perhaps the authorities have that information, and I'm hoping that eventually, I think the acting acting U.S. attorney right now is very clear, as Katie said earlier, that this is very much an ongoing investigation, and I think those are all questions that we look forward to being answered in the future.
Could that lead to an amendment of your lawsuit?
Well, I think I will be amending the lawsuit before all that comes out, just to add Vappy as a defendant. We were I wanted to be careful that we didn't name Vappy early on as a defendant if we didn't know really where he fit into the equation. I think this indictment shows, and this is another thing the indictment really taught us, was we had no idea the extensive relationship. We knew that they were been together in the French Quarter a couple of times and at dinner in different spots. I think we even knew about the Martha's Vineyard trip, but I don't think we understood that, that was how that came about, or the other trips to Napa Valley or San Francisco and all those other places that they had gone together. So all of those things, when you add them up, I think they lend credibility to our theory that this fabricated lawsuit against Anne was really, and particularly given the temporal aspect of it, it was done right on the eve of Vappy's indictment for his initial payroll charges and so forth. And I think it was count 7 in there implicated the time on the Pantala balcony when he was, sitting down with back towards the wall. And so that kind of explains, I think, or is a compelling motivation for Cantrell to act at that point with the assistance of Vappy in filing that suit on Friday, May 10th.
Now we've heard about 15,000 messages that the federal investigators uncovered from their WhatsApp communications. Do you think those could come into play in your lawsuit? And did you ever think that these would be things that wouldn't be turned over to a federal investigator and or court of law?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting for social media and apps altogether. I would venture to say that somewhere in 15,000 messages there's some discussion of what are we going to do with Anne Breaud. The other aspect of this, and it's still in the preliminary stages, is that we've kind of always suspected that the mayor was getting information from the French Market Corporation about Anne's coming and goings. They are really the landlord for the Pantala buildings. They had moved their offices just 100 feet away from Anne's front door. And we kind of, people have kind of suggested that there might have been some information going on. I think there's some people that certainly the mayor was keeping tabs on. We think the mayor might have been keeping tabs on Anne through that office. And so those are things we're still looking into as well.
And quite amazing that, your client, Anne Breaud, would become something of a figure in this whole case, and now in an indictment. They were neighbors. What kind of relationship did they have at the Pataba Apartments?
Well, I think there's always, a wide variety of neighborhood relationships. I mean, you have the ones that you'll borrow a cup of sugar from or eggs, and then ones you just kind of wave at. I think the nature of it, they were a couple of balconies over. I think they might have waved back and forth a little bit, saw each other. I think there wasn't they didn't have any sort of relationship. I mean, Anne really has never met the mayor formally, or had a conversation with her, or been in a room with her. So I don't know that that's necessarily, as with respect to the neighbors, if that's a compelling argument. I mean, I don't think this was a grudge match. There wasn't any hard feelings or ways to go, back against Anne. I think it's important to remember that Anne, and she said this several times, the motivation in taking the picture was not so much capturing the mayor, but it was really Jeffrey Vappy on duty. I mean, I think Anne's been very active in raising funds for the police for the 8th District. She's provides the office with a number of other neighbors and residents of the quarter food and hospitality when they, just to kind of give them a break, because they're overworked. I mean, they have a tough job down there. And I think this really caught Anne off guard when she sees, the guys that are working so hard, and then here's a police officer who is on duty, who is being paid at the time, sitting down and having a glass of wine and shirking his duties. So,
and you said you hadn't really talked to her yet that much about this, but what'd she say, first blush?
I think she said, we didn't talk, we texted, and she let me know where she was, and she said, wow. So wow. I wish I could tell you more, but I think Anne's been a great client. I think a lot of times, and I think Mike can attest to this. She actually listens to her attorney, and she's been very careful about what to say and what not to say. And I think she's kind of put this in my hands to kind of watch and kind of shepherd her through this. And I think she's glad that she's out of town at the time too.
And when we talk about a delay in this, in your case, because of this, any idea if that could be weeks, months, years?
I would think it would be at least as long as the federal trial, if there is a federal trial, exists. I mean, I think until, the reason for the stay would be to protect the mayor's rights of self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. And so, to the extent, until we reach a point in this case that was just filed today, whether it's through a plea bargain or a settlement or a verdict after a trial, that's always still, kind of on the table. And so I think until there's a resolution in that case, one way or another, we won't be able to proceed in our civil case.
Do you guys plan to stay the course?
Absolutely.
And you've already got a judgment in your favor in this situation.
So, interesting. I just filed, earlier in the week, I filed so the Fourth Circuit affirmed the trial court's award of the legal fees in that case. The Fourth Circuit added another $8,000 in legal fees. And then the mayor's taken supervisory writs to the Supreme Court. And I just, my opposition to that was due earlier in the week, and filed that. And so now we're just waiting for the Supreme Court to rule and see whether they take it, and we'll go through an oral argument, or whether they'll just deny it and we can go ahead and start acting on that judgment.
And Mr. Schmidt, the last I checked, that attorney's fee dollar amount was about $23,000. Now, if the mayor, and we've talked about this extensively, how she's combative and tends to double down, is now taking this to the state Supreme Court on a writ, clearly the meter is running and your attorney's fees are going to grow beyond.
That's correct. The way the statute is written is that there are additional attorney's fees for the cost, and the jurisprudence really, additional attorney's fees for the cost of defending the appeals, just like the Fourth Circuit added the $8,000. I'm not sure what the Supreme Court would add, or if they would remand it back to the Fourth Circuit to make another determination. But statutorily, they are allowed.
If you are successful, that means LaToya Cantrell will owe you that money, not the mayor of New Orleans, LaToya Cantrell.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, we'll
Yeah,
have to wait and
that's
see
correct.
as this unfolds.
Right.
Keep us posted, please.
We will.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.